Today, we have quite a sweet episode as we connect with Erica, the founder of Brodo. On today's episode, we go over Erica's story, how her love of fitness and interest in trying to create healthier alternatives to some of the tastiest foods, for this example, cookie dough, took her on a journey to create what we now know as Brodo. On this episode, we hear about some of the struggles that come with being a solo entrepreneur, not having other people to rely on or employees to hand off tasks to. We go over her learnings from the start and ideation of this business all the way to shipping out products across Canada. We go over some of the challenges that come with being an entrepreneur, having to use your balcony as a place to store goods, but also some of the challenges that come to shipping, learning some of the tips and tricks on how to get product from your doorstep to your customers, and ensuring that your product has the same excitement and quality as when you packaged it. Hopefully you guys enjoy this episode, learn a bit more about what it means to be a solo entrepreneur, and some of the learnings you can take from Erica if you were to start your own, whether it be food-based business or any business in general, being a solo entrepreneur. Hopefully you guys enjoy and pick up some cookie dough and eat it guilt-free.
Thanks for having me. My name's Erica. I'm the founder and CEO of Brodo, which is a protein-infused, better-for-you edible cookie dough that's completely plant-based. It contains 5 times the amount of protein found in regular cookie dough. I launched the company back in 2019. I'm a solopreneur, and I'm based out of Ontario, Canada.
So pretty unique, especially with, before COVID. Why cookie dough? Like how did the idea come to be? Were you a baker before? Did you like cooking food, or how did you first like start up with realizing I'm going to start selling cookie dough?
Yeah, so I guess the passion kind of started in 2017.
Mhm,
I started prepping for bodybuilding
mhm,
competitions, and I have a big sweet tooth.
mhm,
And unfortunately, when you're cutting and dieting, you can't eat a lot of delicious sweet things. So I had to manipulate recipes to
mhm,
make it fit into my diet. So I got really good at that. I got really good at baking. I'm not so much a good cook, but baking
mhm,
is more my thing. And I started sharing recipes and posting recipes on my Instagram, and it started getting a lot of attention, and people would recreate my recipes,
mhm,
and people would ask me if I would ever sell the things that I made. And I never really thought of it being like a
mhm,
business, really,
mhm.
or something that I could pursue and like monetize.
Yeah.
So after that, after I competed, I was super lost, and I went backpacking through Southeast Asia
Mhm,
for over 3 months. And
mhm,
then that's when I met entrepreneurs. And then I guess that kind of just like bridged, I guess, the
mhm.
gap between like my passion and understanding that I could make it a business.
Yeah.
And I realized that I could
Mhm,
do it. And then I got home, and then I kind of started brainstorming. And cookie dough for me is like such a nostalgic
mhm,
treat. Like my neighbor's mom was a baker, and like growing up we would like go to her house and like just eat cookie dough out of the
mhm,
bucket and like until we got sick, right?
mhm,
And I wanted to like bring back that nostalgic treat, but in a better way. And I've always really cared about the functional properties of foods and snacks,
mhm,
like protein bars and protein chips and protein ice cream. So that's
mhm,
kind of why I made it protein
mhm.
and plant based.
So when you were initially making it, was it always intended to be plant-based, or did that adapt as the recipe went on? Like, was there a reason it was plant-based, or was it just because it was easier to have a calorically, I guess, less cookie dough mixture without having like any eggs or I don't know what else, or butter, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess it always was plant-based. That's kind of what I wanted it to be,
Uh,
just so I could, like, widen the consumer
mhm,
window. Because I kind of looked at different industries, and, like, the plant-based
mhm,
industry is growing exponentially, like, it's
mhm,
blowing up, and people are starting to like, even if someone isn't vegan, they still seek out plant-based foods, like,
yeah.
people just like it, and it's also, like, a good marketing tool, like, you can,
Mhm,
like, go into the grocery store and see plant-based,
mhm,
plant-based, you know? So I also wanted to use like quality ingredients as well. And I now am vegan. I wasn't
mhm,
before. I just recently transitioned.
mhm,
But yeah, I wanted it to be something that everyone could enjoy. And a lot of my friends are vegan. So that's
mhm.
kind of why I made it a vegan product.
And that's so cool. I mean, obviously, like we were saying, plant based is so growing so exponentially, but also people looking at what they're eating. I
Mhm.
think that especially, I think for our generation, especially when I went to university and stuff, it was like the whole YouTube fitness thing became popular, and even since like 2010, 2011, the knowledge gap has changed dramatically over the past 10 years. Before, like no one knew what a macro was; everyone was just like eyeballing it, and then people are like, oh, counting calories. Now there's apps for like the whole world has transitioned so much more. into understanding what we're eating, kind of what's in our food, and getting people, I guess, taking hold or getting responsibility of what they're, what they're eating, what they're making, kind of being a little more conscious of that. When you were initially making like this cookie dough, like were you just making it like as a snack for your side? Did you start like, with your workout buddies or within the gym? Were you like selling it to people then, or was it just something you would make as a snack? And then when you got back, you're like, hey, this is a unique product people keep asking me about. Let me see if I can start selling it. Or how did that whole like transition start? How did you get people trying it initially?
So I kind of had a version of it that I
Mhm,
made for myself. Like I would make like these protein bite things and I
mhm,
would put them in the freezer and just like kind of eat them and they were almost like
mhm,
cookie dough bites. And then I guess when I got home from my trip, I sat down with myself and tried to figure out what it was I wanted to make and bring to the
mhm,
market. And then when I decided cookie dough, that's when I like got into my kitchen and I started like putting things in like the bowl and
mhm,
mixing things and trying things and getting my friends and my
mhm,
family to try it. And then I guess after a bit of tweaks and finalizing the
mhm,
formula, then I launched it into the market.
mhm.
And then it's kind of evolved as well over the past,
Yeah.
gosh, it's been almost 2 years, 2 years in
Mhm,
December. It's changed a few times, and then I'm in the process of actually changing it again and kind
mhm,
of just like improving it as I
mhm.
grow it.
And one of the challenges, especially trying to make things like you could say more healthy, was like taste. How did you figure out the trade off between having like a good tasting product and a relatively more healthy product? Was it hard to find a balance, or did you kind of hit the nail on the head by using different products?
Oh, yeah, this is difficult, especially with protein products and
Hmm.
plant-based protein products because, yeah, plant-based protein tastes earthy.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still really trying to work on it because
Yeah.
I used to be, I would drink whey, like, that was
Yeah.
kind of the one that I would eat and
Mhm.
have all the time, and it's not very like, it's more creamy because it's, like,
Yeah.
dairy-based, right? Whereas plant protein, like, it tastes like you're literally, yeah, you're shoving your face, like, in dirt,
Yeah.
basically. So I've used different types of proteins, and I've tried to, like, manipulate the formula
Mhm.
to kind of mask it, and a lot of it comes down to food science, like, that's something
Mhm.
that I never really even knew was a thing,
Mhm.
and that's what I'm going through right now with, like, an R&D
Mhm.
team, and we're working on my formula and, like, doing tests and stuff on it and, like, trying to, like, use natural, I guess, sweeteners
Mhm.
and ingredients, but then also make sure that has a clean, like, good taste and, like, a
Mhm.
good nutritional profile, and there's, like, many things that are, like, involved with it,
Yeah.
and, the cost too is, like, what I'm learning is when you have a product that has quality
Mhm.
ingredients, it's gonna be more expensive,
Mhm.
so that's another thing is you wanna try to find a middle ground where consumers are willing to pay the price for the premium product too.
It's so true. I know even like pro speaking of like the health industry and vegan industry, the quality and taste of food has changed dramatically even over the past 5 years. But even today, like vegan protein versus whey protein, although there is science, it is noticeable. It's one of those things where people who love their you can't taste the difference, but you can.
Yeah.
It's very noticeable. You're like, wow, like I cannot just drink this with water. I need to throw this in a smoothie. But you're right, there is a lot of change, and the food science behind that is getting so much more impressive compared to what it was, even 5 years ago. So when you started making this product, how did you know you? So you said you came back, you started kind of figuring out what you wanted to do. How did you start selling it? Was it, did you start throwing it in a jar and going to a local store? Like, how did that transition go from a maybe baking a few things at home or making a few things at home to saying, okay, I'm gonna try to put this out on the market? And where did you start selling it? Was it just online initially, or did you, go to a local store? How did that work?
It was a very long process. So, like, I got
Mhm,
home from my trip in, I think, February of 2019, and then I
mhm,
actually launched the product in December. So, I wanted to make sure that I was prepared for being a
mhm,
business owner because, like, I had the formula. Like, I'm good at baking and making things, but when you're a business owner, you have to do a lot of other things that you might not
mhm,
necessarily understand or be good at, like the financial side of things and like the operational side of things. And so I was kind of trying to figure all of that out and get that in place and figure out like what my channels would be, whether I
mhm,
would be doing just e-com or doing wholesale. And trying to figure out where to spend my time wisely because, again, like I'm a solopreneur and I have to figure out where to spend my time because it's so valuable. So initially, I kind of like thought of it as like a little side project. I didn't think it would go anywhere, especially like the first like 4 or 5 months. Like in December, I launched on Shopify. I did like I think 18, I think I sold 18 jars that month, which is like I thought it was a lot at the time.
Mhm.
And a lot of them were my family and friends, so it didn't even really feel like it actually counted.
Yeah.
So I guess that happened, and then it was like a very slow build, and then I did get into a couple like local like mom and pop shops at that point as well. Um, but yeah, most of my sales are from ecom, and they kind of have been just ecom mainly the past 2-ish years, and then I'm planning on launching into retail soon.
Oh, that's so exciting. And so initially when you was starting off, was there a tipping point where you went from like this is a fun, hobby, a little side hustle to, getting the idea that, oh, this could be a real business, like this be something I could grow and get, very serious about it. Was there a sales tipping point you had, or like when did that flip switch to, or when was there a realization that, oh shoot, like this could be a real business that I could actually grow and, sustain myself with?
Yeah, I think probably the summer of 2019, 2020, 2020,
Hmm.
year after. So yeah, the following year, I guess, I don't know what happened. I think in the summer I had something blow up on social media and I got a bunch of orders. And I remember being at the kitchen and like slaving away for like 8 hours, like making product and picking and packing and like operating out of my house. And I kind of like realized I'm like, okay, this is not sustainable and the business is growing, but I'm not. And then I
Hmm.
got on LinkedIn and I started connecting with people and then I started getting mentors and I was like, okay, I'm actually way deeper into this than I thought and I need to like follow through on it
Yeah.
instead of kind of like, calling it a side hustle or a side
Hmm.
project. Like I need to fully commit to this because there is opportunity there and I need to take it now. So
Hmm.
that's kind of when I guess like that was my pivotal point for me is when I started talking to people and like fully understanding the industry and like what I was getting myself into. And I guess as I invested more and more of my money into it, I'm like, okay, this is getting serious now. The
Yeah.
moves that I'm making are a little more expensive. So
And that's so true. It always seems to be the case where it's like most of people I speak to, or a lot of entrepreneurs comes to they start a business or start something, whether it be for a passion or something they're really interested in, and then there's always like a tipping point where they're like, oh, like there's something serious. Like I've actually have happy customers, or people are telling me, oh, do you have a store? And you're like, oh, this is just like something I'm doing for fun, and that is always interesting to hear. Like, what was that point when people realize, like, oh my goodness, like I consider myself an entrepreneur now. Like I'm a real business owner. I feel a lot of times everyone assumes that it's like, oh well, you have a business, you for sure feel like one, but it's always like imposter syndrome where you're like, it's
yeah.
it's me. I'm finally one of those people now. I can do this. And it's always unique to hear that transition in that story. So when you start packaging at home and start selling it, what were some early on? What were some of the being a sole entrepreneur, like you said, you have to kind of do everything. Was there any big roadblocks you were in face or more difficult than you would expect, like that you thought wouldn't be that complex, whether it be logistics or packaging, that you were like, oh shoot, like this is more intensive or more complex than I initially thought? Or was it the opposite? Was there anything where you said, oh, like that's gonna be so scary, and then once you got into it, you're like, oh, this is very doable and manageable?
Uh, yeah, I think I underestimated a lot. Definitely, I have overestimated a few things, but for the
Mhm.
most part, like I did not really realize what I was getting myself into,
Mhm.
especially, um, like for example, at the beginning of 20, like this year, I think in March, I had like got really lucky with like TikTok and I started doing
Mhm.
really well on the platform, and then I guess like I had 150 orders come in like 24 hours and I
Wow.
just like I'm pretty much by myself. So I saw those like orders coming in and I was like, "Oh my god. Oh my god. Like what am I going to do? This is like
Mhm.
very scary." So I put in so much work that week
Mhm.
and like was at the kitchen nonstop and then picking and packing and chipping and doing everything
Mhm.
and I think I underestimated how scrappy you need to get.
Mhm.
Like, for example, at the beginning, I had this big misconception in my head that I couldn't work out of my home. I
Mhm.
needed a place to go into to work. Like, I needed an office, like commercial space. And I remember I found a place, I rented it for like 6 or 7 months, and it was just like burning a hole in my pocket, and I didn't need it. And then I sat down with like all my financials and my cash flow, and
Mhm.
I was like, I'm literally losing money. Why am I paying for this space? So I
Yeah.
like moved it all back in into my home and was like, I just accepted that that was the stage that I was at, and I'll grow into that when I'm ready. But yeah, like I think um I got caught up like comparing myself to a lot of other people at the beginning of my journey, and that was kind of like what I guess messed me up in some
Mhm.
areas. Like I needed to be like I don't know, I needed to be more realistic about where
Mhm.
I was and what I was capable of doing at that point in my journey. Um but yeah, and then I guess like another thing that was really challenging for me was just like putting myself out there, cuz like I'm a person who does not like asking for help, and I'm very stubborn, and I like doing everything myself, and you can't be like that. Especially if you want to grow a business, like you need to have more hands on board, because you're not going to be able to grow it. So I think like it took me 8 or 9 months to like go on LinkedIn and start like reaching out to people and asking for help and asking for advice and getting mentors, and like finally accepting that like I couldn't do this on my own. Like that was kind
Mhm.
of something that I needed to like do and swallow my pride and like reach out and ask for help. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of the
N-
two things.
it's so true. I think a lot of times, like when we spoke about before, is that being an entrepreneur at the beginning, it's really hard to find other examples of people who are in a similar stage than you, because the ones who are you can find or look up are the ones that are hyper successful. They're like the the top 1 or 2% that just, whether it be luck or I mean just great skill, it's they're almost one of those people that are almost not in a different league, but it's hard to compare to the rest of the rest. I mean, it's the same thing in the fitness world. It's like when you every time you say, whether it be within bodybuilding or any of those other silos, it's that like, oh, you look up how do I, workouts or anything. You always see the best people, because the people who you hear stories about are the ones who are excelling, and it's hard to compare yourself to, who you were, who who else might be at your skill level or else your knowledge level. And I think what you said is very important. You always have to compare it back to yourself. Like, okay, am I doing better than I was last month? If I am, that's good, because eventually, compounding interest, you will
Right.
get better and things will grow. But it's always hard, especially within social media, to find other good comparables. And what you said about like asking for help, I think it's so important as well. I always was surprised when talking to like a lot of successful entrepreneurs or successful people, when you ask them like, "Oh, how did you become so successful?" A lot of times it's like, "Oh, I had these mentors," or "Oh,
Yeah.
these group of people who I worked with," and then you would never realize that, because you always think it was them who were they were just genius. They knew everything instantly. And a lot of times their stories are like, "Oh, I've been doing this for 15 years," you know. Some moderate success, and then in the past 2 years, when everything finally clicked, I had that years of experience in the industry, and you never really see those stories because
Mhm.
they were a nobody, or they, the business was so small until the last few years. So I think it's really important to hear that asking for help and just getting other people's knowledge is so useful and so interesting, because a lot of people will have gone through similar journeys to you, and can share some of the do's and don'ts, which is always helpful to save time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Early on, I know you said you looked at getting a location, but being a solopreneur, was there any ever a time where you're like, I need to hire people, I need like a team, and really, how are you able to manage your time personally? Because I think one of the hard things of being a solo entrepreneur is that, like, you as a person, it's very hard to separate you and your business. How are you able to separate those two worlds, or how you plan your days so you're not constantly working, or vice versa?
That's, like, still something that I struggle with,
Mhm.
and I had this big idea in my head that, I guess my life and my business were completely separate, and I was
Mhm.
trying to, like, balance everything, and, like, trying to balance everything, I kept adding stuff on, like, each side of the scale, like, "Oh, I need to take more care of myself, I need to work out every day in the morning, I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do all these things, and then
Mhm.
for the business, I need to do all these things," and I just, like I got very caught up in, like, trying to separate the
Mhm.
2, but I think, like, I just accepted the fact that it's my life now, it's, like, who I am,
Mhm.
you can't completely separate yourself from it, especially, like, you have fires to put out every day,
Mhm.
and you have shit to do, and at the beginning, you kind of have to rely on yourself to do it all if you
Mhm.
are a solopreneur, if you don't have a co-founder or team under
Mhm.
you, but yeah, I think I just like surround myself with people who are at the same stage as me, and then people who are like beyond my
Mhm.
stage, who have built like basically the company that I want to build, like the
Mhm.
same size, and they've successfully done it. And I have a business coach who kind of helps me navigate everything. And if I'm feeling like, don't get me wrong, like there's days and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I literally have no clue what I'm doing right
Mhm.
now. And I need to hire someone to do this and this, but
Mhm.
like, I don't have the capital right now to do that. And the time will come. So I'm
Mhm.
kind of just putting on all the hats right now, even though they don't all fit me. Like I know where I'm good. Like I'm
Mhm,
very good at branding, I'm good at marketing, I'm good at
mhm,
storytelling, I'm good with customer service. Like those are my strengths, and then my
mhm,
weaknesses are like numbers
mhm,
and operations and all of that.
mhm,
So when the time comes and when I have the money to do so, I will
mhm,
hire people on. But I think at the beginning, like it sucks to hear it, but you're gonna have to do a lot of the heavy lifting
mhm,
and you'll get it to a certain point and then you'll have people to help you lift it.
mhm. And I think that's so true. A lot of people I've spoken to, even said in the past that with their success, they said it was so important for them to learn how to do the finance, learn how to do the operations, learn even how to do the programming. Because then when it came to hire, they knew a little bit just to say, hey, this is what I need, this is what I don't need. And it's one of those humbling stories where in the moment you're like, oh, I just wish I had the money to hire. Like, this is ridiculous. Why am I learning to do all these things? I'm never going to do this a year from now. But after it, kind of looking back, you're always like, oh, I'm so grateful I had that opportunity to do it. So now I know. So if I work with an accountant, I understand how the book looks. I can't do the same level as them, but I know enough to have a conversation, ask the right questions. And I think that's so important. Now, business is growing, things are going well. Then COVID hits. Did COVID change how the business operated at all? Did it affect, you know, your plan, you were possibly looking for a retail in the past and then canceled it, or really because your e-commerce was the main focus, did it really not make a big difference, or did it grow because everyone started staying at home and looking for unique foods to eat? Kind of how that whole pandemic, especially in Canada and Ontario, changed the business at all, if at all?
So I guess in terms of the two different channels, like for wholesaling into
Mhm,
retail, like that kind of took a hit for me because I
mhm,
was wanting to grow in there and I
mhm,
couldn't really just go into stores and set up a table and give out samples and stuff because stores were opening and closing and opening and closing and then they weren't selling product and then they didn't want
mhm,
to take on new product, especially like smaller, like independently owned
mhm,
stores. So that kind of rained on my parade there. But like in terms of ecom, like I did invest a little bit of money into paid ads, like on
mhm,
Instagram and Facebook. And I think that was when like my business started to blow up because those
mhm,
started doing really well. And that was in the summer of
mhm,
2020,
mhm,
2020.
mhm,
Um, and yeah, I saw it kind of snowball from there. Like it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And then that's like where I guess, most of my sales were coming
mhm.
from. So that was kind of a blessing in disguise. But then also, it was the first summer of me shipping a frozen perishable product, which was a very interesting and big learning curve for
Mhm.
me. So
How did that come to be? I know, like, shipping, especially within anything that's perishable and having to freeze it, like, how did you learn what to do? And how did you not, like, where do you have a location, or did you have a bunch of boxes in your house now that you're like, pick them up and ship them out? Like, how did you manage all that? Because I know logistics is a headache, even when you're an expert in it. It's just such a headache to manage. How did that learning curve go for you?
it's literally the most scrappiest, like yeah, I order boxes and I keep everything, like, in my house, and I had
Mhm,
a freezer like, I'm moving again, but,
mhm,
I have a freezer in my living room, and that's, like, where I would store all my product, and then have, like, my dining room table, and I would have, like, my, whiteboard with, like,
mhm,
my, like, a vision board
mhm,
almost, like, my plan and stuff,
mhm,
and then labels, like, on my table and stuff, and yeah, so I literally when I would get an order in, but in the summer when I was still trying to figure out how to ship this product, because at first I was like, oh, it could be shipped like without any like ice packs or anything. It'll be
mhm.
fine. And then I learned about food science, and then I was like, that's not okay. Because I
Yeah,
started getting customers like messaging me and they're like, oh my God, my dough is moldy or it's
yeah,
bad. And I'm like, oh shit, like I need to ship it with ice
yeah,
packs now. And like, so I had to kind of go back to the drawing board and then figure out how I could work that pricing into like my cash flow and make sure I
mhm,
could afford to even ship out orders. So yeah, I would sit, pick and pack at my table after I would get orders. Like I
mhm,
think in the mornings I would do that. And then I had this little wagon that I got off Amazon. And this is what I still do. I pack it full of like Pure Later and FedEx and
mhm,
Canada Post orders and then would take them there and like load up my Jeep and stuff. Or
mhm,
like FedEx comes and like picks up the
mhm,
orders. But yeah, it's very scrappy, very startup mode.
mhm,
But I needed to do that in order to grow and get to like I guess at a good healthy volume where I can outsource it and get
mhm.
like a 3PL to fulfill
Yeah.
those orders.
And I think people underestimate how expensive it is to do logistics and shipping
Ugh.
because with especially with ice packs and food, it's because it's not like a necklace or a piece of jewelry you're sending in the mail, if it takes 4 months, a week, it doesn't really matter. Like food has to get there. You have to have the right things and package it. And it's never, I always thought like, I'm like, oh, technology, email's free. Like shipping should be it's not. It is a headache and it's so expensive, especially when it's like you were saying, perishable goods where there is those freezer packs. They are quite heavy because you have to have ice or
Mhm.
that's made of not water, but like it's liquid, so it's, it is heavy. How have you had any of those days like so when you're packaging, like obviously some of your days are super busy. Have you ever had it where you're like, I've run out of space in my room and you start like going into other rooms? Like, would you ever end up like, where do all these packages go? Has there ever been the thing where like you wake up and there's literally like a box beside you? Or like have you been able to kind of are you I guess my question along the way, are you quite organized? Have you been able to like segment the rooms off, or has it become wild, especially as growth happens, where you're like, there's a box in the kitchen, there's a box over here? Like, how does that all work, especially being a sole entrepreneur in a in a home?
Yeah, I mean, I don't my home is my workspace, it's everywhere, like, especially too, like, if someone comes over and they just, like, look over into my living room, it's like this giant ass whiteboard with, like, all
Mhm,
this, like, marker, like,
mhm,
writing all these different ideas and things, and then I have, like, I can't even eat at my
mhm,
dining room table because it just has, like, papers and labels and just all of that stuff on there and tape and
mhm,
stuff. But yeah, like when I lived in my old condo, because now I'm living like
mhm,
at my dad's,
mhm,
in my on my balcony, like in the winter, I would if I had a ton of orders coming in, I would stay up really late the night before because it was winter and it was
mhm,
cold, and I would just pick and pack all these orders, and then I would put them outside on my balcony overnight. And then the next day, I would bring them down and drop them off like at
mhm.
FedEx or wherever they had to go. So I kind of like made it work with my space.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I even stored like bubble wrap and like mailers like on my balcony. And then I had a storage unit that came with my condo that
Mhm,
I had just like I think I have pictures somewhere, but it's like, oh God, like 500 like 10 by 10 by 5 boxes and like flour and sugar and like all these ingredients there. So I kind of just like figure out where to put it. And that was like one thing that I had to let go is I'm a very organized by the books person and you
mhm.
can't really be like that all the time, especially
Yeah.
when you're a startup and you have like shit everywhere and you
Mhm.
have like your days are sometimes chaotic and you like wake up and then you go to bed and you're like, "What did I even do today?" Like, so
Yeah.
yeah,
It's
make it work.
always so hectic. So one thing that is always challenging, especially I know a lot of people who've created like food or anything edible, is that you always have to figure out like how many versions to make or like what flavors to do. How are you able to choose the flavors? Was it just what was popular? Like, will you add some or remove some? Or because I know if you have like too many, it's difficult. 'Cause, all those supplies you need. The Oreos for making Oreo. Like, there's always different versions. How were you able to choose the flavors you created, or was it like you start with one, then kept expanding as interest grew?
So I started with 4, and those were, like, the most popular flavors, and then
Mhm,
I guess, like, as time went on, people started demanding and wanting new things.
mhm,
I know it's not too difficult, especially when you're at, like, a smaller size and you're self-manufacturing, because you don't have to order, like, a ton of ingredients up front, you can kind of just order what you need,
mhm,
because you're doing that smaller volume. But, yeah, I would honestly like, the relationship that I have with my customers, a lot of them would, like, recommend things, or I would do, like, Instagram polls and, like, wanna, like, get their advice and see what they
mhm,
liked and what they didn't like and all of that. So they've, like, been a huge, I guess, factor in, like,
mhm.
determining what flavors to launch. But, yeah, it's interesting because I have a lot of flavors right now, and I kind of like did like a little hack and like I kind of mix and match like ingredients I already had to make new flavors.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like a little life hack that I did. That's been super helpful. And people still think they're getting a new flavor, but I'm really just combining two, which is, yeah.
That's so smart. I know a lot of like within the food industry, and love or hate it, like one thing they're very good at is like, hey, your store has this many things. What can we mix that's brand new for the same food? It's like, I mean, all those fast food stores, it's the same ingredients. Just like, oh, we're putting, these sprinkles with this, and bam, there's a new McFlurry, there's a new
Yeah.
product. So I think it's really ingenious to say, okay, these are like my boundaries. What can I create within these like scope of what's easy to source or uh, build with? But yeah, no, it's always so funny because I mean you have some exciting flavors on your site as well. So I was always wondering like, how did you come up with some of these? Is it just based on cookies you liked in the past? And you say, hey, I want to brodo it and make it like my version of the product. And yeah, no. So when developing these products, right, shipping them out to customers, you talk a little bit about doing Facebook ads, Instagram ads, doing some stuff on TikTok. Where did you spend your effort? Was there a specific social media channel or marketing channel you focus on, or did you try a bunch and then said, "Hey, this platform tends to have a lot of my customers on it"? How were you able to navigate the whole world of social media? Because there's so many ways of spending your time, so many different post types, and so many ways of spending dollars. How were you able to figure out the best kind of focus to put your time into?
Yeah, so I'll preface this and say I don't really spend money on marketing anymore.
Mhm.
Like this year I spent 150 bucks, which is
Oh,
like
wow.
not very common.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess like when I first started marketing my product, I focused on Instagram and
Mhm.
was only on Instagram. And then I guess when the pandemic hit, I started exploring TikTok because that was
Mhm.
just something that, like, I think from December to January of 2020, there was like a billion or 100 million,
Mhm.
something like that, like
Yeah.
TikTok downloads. Everyone was on it and everyone was making videos and like
Mhm.
doing trends and dances and stuff. And I was like, I was on there, but I wasn't making videos because I kind
Mhm.
of like had this ego and was like, it's for kids. Like it wouldn't help me or my brand at all.
Yeah.
So like I didn't really make anything on it, but I knew the platform and I was on the platform just for fun for my own personal
Mhm.
reasons. But yeah, and then I guess in January, February of this year, my friend launched a business and
Mhm.
she hired someone to make TikToks for her, and that was her only means of marketing. And
Oh,
I guess
wow.
with consistency, with posting on the platform, they sold out their inventory. They had videos go viral. They got like close to 100,000 followers now, and they just like
Oh,
kept growing
wow.
and growing and growing. And then I was kind of like looking over at her and like what they were doing, and I was like, damn, maybe I should put in some effort there.
Yeah.
'Cause you know what? Like a lot of my customers, they're on TikTok. Like that's the demographic that I'm kind of going after. So in March, I guess I had started like making videos regularly and they weren't really
Mhm.
taking off and I was getting discouraged. And then I randomly posted a TikTok super late at night. Yeah, back in March.
Mhm.
And I woke up to like all these notifications from like Instagram. I had emails through my Shopify site.
Mhm.
I had 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 followers on TikTok and it just kept
Mhm.
growing and growing and growing. And I was like, oh my God. And then I was getting all these orders.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Oh, this is really interesting because this video took me 2 minutes to make. I didn't spend any
Mhm.
money. It just was time that I invested into this." So,
Mhm.
I think, like, after that, happened, I kind of realized that there is so much potential for organic growth as long as you're consistent.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where I spend most of my time now because that's where my customers are, and
Mhm.
I always tell, like, other brands, like, "Don't try to do all the platforms, try to
Yeah.
figure out one and dedicate your time to that one and get good
Mhm.
at it and build community on that platform because it's hard to do it on everything 'cause there's so many."
Mhm. I think that's one thing people don't realize is that within the social media world, like the content that you build for Facebook, for Instagram, for TikTok, for any other platform tends to be like has to be separate if you want to have success. Like, I mean, big companies they'll have like a Instagram team, a Reddit team, like it's
Yeah,
separate because the content is not. Although you can reshare it, like you said, for spreading yourself too thin, it doesn't. You're not really putting your full effort into it. And funny enough, I did speak to someone who created a like TikTok marketing company where they connected uh, influencers to like large organizations. And he said the same thing where it was like, when you started off business, we're like, oh, this is just for kids. But then he was like, hey, look, if you look at the numbers and like the click through rate and like the actual business behind it, this is the best platform to use.
absolutely.
And it's interesting, a few of those like companies now who just use TikTok. And I guess, like you said, even me, when I saw TikTok like a few years ago, I was like, oh, this is for children. I'm
Yeah,
still using it today. It's one of those things where like I think everyone you get a little confident. You're like, oh, this is gonna like a fad. But then you realize, like, oh, if I looked at this through strictly a business lens of like, how can I spend my time to get the most orders? It's like a very good platform, especially I think the demographics on it. Although there is still a lot of dancing and young kids, like most of my colleagues use TikTok. It's not just a children based thing anymore. And I think it's really interesting how you said you come to realization that, oh, like maybe I should look at other sources. And yeah, it was the same thing with TikTok for me. I was like, "Ah, no need." And now I'm like, I wish I started this and grew a following right
yeah,
when it was taking off.
absolutely.
It's always the funniest thing where and you said being like sole entrepreneurs, figuring out like where can I put the intensive effort for like a shortest period of time so I can spend time doing other things as well. And marketing always can be a huge time sink, but also like you said, it can be a huge rewarding relatively cheap, especially no marketing spend to grow your business.
Mhm.
So as things start growing, you getting more orders, what does the like next 6 months look for you? Is there a you're moving? Is there any new plans, any new product upgrades, any new like merch? Like how do you create a business plan, focus on it because things are moving, move quickly, but you also want to make sure that like you have goals. Kind of what does the 6 months look for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I planned things to be happening a lot quicker than they are, and
Mhm,
I'm learning now with, like, a physical, like, CPG, like, food product,
mhm,
there are so many pieces that you need to have in place. Like there's supply chain, there's like you need like containers and the right labels, and you need to comply with CFI regulations,
mhm,
like all these different things. So I found a manufacturer that's
mhm,
actually based in the GTA, and that's kind of why I
oh,
moved
mhm,
back this way. So instead of me going to the kitchen and slaving for like 6 or 7 hours and
mhm,
making as many as I physically can until my hands bleed,
mhm,
if someone else is going to be making them. So we're going to do our first production run in a few months, hopefully. And then
mhm,
from there, that'll launch into retail stores in the GTA and then eventually across Canada. So I'm going to focus on regional expansion and then
mhm,
national expansion. And then eventually, I would love to explore the US
mhm,
because the market is so big there and there's so much
mhm,
opportunity.
mhm.
But yeah, that's
It's-
kind of what it's
yeah,
looking like.
and especially speaking of like CPG goods, the states is so much better prepared and their shelving is so much better for especially refrigerated or frozen goods within the health food store. I know if you compare like a nutrition or a health food section in Canada, it's like like half a little section. In the states, it's like a whole aisle. I
Mhm.
know like someone else spoke on the podcast, Midday Square is like
Yeah.
they travel everywhere just to like figure out, okay, how are our products located, how is the branding. And I think a lot of people, it's always challenging when making a CPG good, is to figure out, once I give it to distributor, or once it's in local stores, like I you lose a little bit of control because they have to shelve it, they have to display it, they have to make sure everything's met. I always think that's a challenging aspect to figure out. How can you make it almost like dummy proof, like so that it's the best product every time, and because people will always mess up. Some things will close down. You have to make sure this gets. It's always like a huge hurdle. And I think it's. I know when I were with a few like friends back in the day, when it was like, oh, a cookie business or anything other business, you don't realize once you go to into the whole like distribution world, it's like a whole different ball game. It's completely different than buying and selling online.
Oh
And I
my
know
god.
how challenging that can be,
Yeah.
especially even like in Ontario and then looking expansion. It's like different levels to this game. And it's exciting that now you're kind of taking those steps to get into the big world of like with the disties, especially with this growing.
Yeah.
As things got, you know, you're expanding to kind of have a store to start manufacturing it. How do you collect feedback from your customers? Like, how has that been interesting? Because I know a lot of times it can be challenging, you know, understanding what people are asking for or comments you're getting back. Some can be negative, some can be positive. How have you been able to manage that, especially like you said initially, your business primarily grows through social media. How have you been interacting with your customers, and how is that? Has there been a learning there, or kind of how has that been going?
Yeah, I think that's, like, what I do really well is, like, I
Hmm.
have a really good relationship with my customers. I'm, like,
Hmm.
similar to, like you probably talked to, like, Jake from
Hmm.
Midday Squares, yeah, like, they're building, like, a culture almost, like, it's a
Hmm.
community, and, like, my customers are kind of, like, on the same level with me, like, I don't think of them as being
Hmm.
below me, like, I care about them, and without them, I wouldn't have a business, so
Hmm.
I make sure to like communicate with them regularly. Every single note or every single order that goes at my door, I handwrite a note like with their name and stuff. And
Hmm.
like I get to know them on a more like deeper, meaningful level. And then I connect with them through like their socials, like TikTok and Instagram and stuff. And um like they're pretty honest with me, like what they don't like. And then I also hired a like a brand development agency,
Hmm.
and they actually picked a handful of my customers to like
Hmm.
interview and get their feedback on like the whole brand and product itself. And
Hmm.
that was really helpful and kind of helped me steer the boat in the right direction
Hmm.
as I grow the business.
Mhm. Yeah, and I do think it's so important, that especially like having any good, is that like you want to develop a brand and like you are part of the brand, and kind of making a culture around it is so important. And those handwritten notes, I know, especially when I'm even working in sales for other organizations, like people start doing that and it makes such a big difference.
Mhm.
And like as a customer, you're like, it cheers up your day, makes you so happy, and I mean, it is a lot of effort for if you're doing a lot of orders, but it's a small thing that can really make a difference when people coming back to you. So, I mean, your story is so interesting, especially kind of growing it as an individual, trying to grow the business, especially within Canada during COVID, during a pandemic, shipping everything, figuring all that out. Your story is quite unique, and especially with your growth through like through social media channels. If people want to follow you or kind of be a part of your story, where is the best places to find Brodo and you?
Yeah, so TikTok or Instagram, it's Brodo Canada, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn, Erica Rankin.